Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to this webinar, Poland's Hydrogen Gambit, Charting the Path for a Strategic Refresh. My name is Tamara Lagurashvili. I'm Director for Central and Eastern Europe at Clinia Task Force, and I will be moderating today's discussion. A little bit about Clinia Task Force. Clinia Task Force is a global climate organization which was founded in 1996 with global staff working worldwide with offices in Boston, DC, and Brussels. We are working to accelerate some of the most pragmatic climate solutions through technology innovation, policy change, and thought leadership. So once again, a big thank you to all of you for joining us today. And before going into the panel discussions and really unpacking some of the most pertinent questions about hydrogen in Poland, maybe a little bit of context why we're having the discussion today and what is in the store today. So today we have 90 minutes to talk about ins and outs and all the nitty-gritties about Poland's hydrogen ambitions, aspirations, challenges, but more importantly, the policies that needs to underpin those development. Poland is currently third biggest producer and consumer of hydrogen, but most of it is primarily gray hydrogen. So obviously, a lot of questions about Poland's energy transition and transition to low emissions economy and what role can clean hydrogen play, especially in decarbonizing hard-to-abate sector. Poland is obviously dubbed as the industrial powerhouse of Central and Eastern Europe. So decarbonizing while retaining industrial competitiveness is of utmost importance for national purposes, but also for the whole region as well. There is obviously lots of political developments happening at the EU level and the national level as well. The first reactions of the European Parliament election is just winding down. We already know the MEPs from Poland who will be charting the path to Brussels soon. So a lot to be still seen in terms of the ambition for the next 5 years of the work, but also Poland will be taking the role of the Council presidency from January 2025. So a lot of eyes also on Poland in terms of its increased ambition on climate, energy and economic security as well. Obviously, some very interesting strategic updates happening internally in Poland as well. This year is really a very hot space for all the strategic updates happening. Currently, the revised version of the National Energy and Climate Plan, so-called NSCP, is being finalized, where we hopefully will see more increased ambition. PEP 2040 is also around the corner, and we hope to see an updated version of it down the road to an obviously national hydrogen strategy, which is the core discussion point for our conversation today, which we hopefully updated this year as well. So to talk about this and many more and really go into the deep dives of the Polish hydrogen ecosystem, today we have a stellar panel representing the diverse backgrounds from the government to the project developers to industry to civil society and academia to really bring a holistic and very diverse views together. We are joined today by Simon Beleski, Director, Electromobility and Hydrogen Economy Department at the Ministry of Climate and Environment, Wojciech Lach, Manager, Hydrogen Project Coordination at Orlen, Żaneta Klostowska, Director, Cluster of Hydrogen Technologies, Gregor Szorek, Deputy Director for Economic Affairs, Institute for Power Engineering, Michał Smolen, Head of Climate and Energy Program at Instrat, and Alex Carr, Europe Policy Manager, Zero Carbon Fuels at Clinia Task Force. Thank you very much to all of you for taking the time to join today's webinar. And before going into the panel discussion, a bit of housekeeping rules for everybody joining us today. So we have approximately 90 minutes today. We start first with the panel discussions, then we will have approximately 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A, during which we will bring up some questions from the audience. So I would like to encourage everybody attending today to post your questions throughout the webinar in the Q&A section. And then we also have a chat section on Zoom webinar where I encourage all of you to share your comments, feedbacks, and we will make sure to get back to them during the webinar. So thanks again to all of you, to the panelists and the attendees for joining. And maybe let's get right into that, to the most exciting part of it. Why don't we start, Simon, with you, to do a little bit of scene setting maybe before we go into the depth and complexities of the hydrogen developments in Poland. And maybe you could help us to frame the conversation by answering the following question. Why does actually clean hydrogen even matter for Poland, and how the government is actually supporting its development?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation for today's webinar. When it comes to your question, Tamara, Poland is a quite big industrial country. We produce and use a lot of hydrogen in our chemical industry, petrochemical industry. We produce a lot of fertilizers, so we need a lot of hydrogen. And as for today, we are quite big producer because we produce more than 1 million tons of hydrogen. It's mostly hydrogen produced from the fossil fuels, which is not in line with the policy of European Union and with the goals of policy of European Union. But as for today, is the most economic, valuable way to produce hydrogen and the most popular. However, we see the need to transform this production into more sustainable production of the hydrogen. And so that's why for us, the hydrogen is the way to keep our economy competitive, to build green, maybe not green, but low emission economy based on hydrogen. And I think when the new market, like hydrogen market, appears ahead of us, it's always a good chance for the country to boost its economy. So that's why we are focused on the hydrogen. But what I would like to underline is that we are not only focused on this green hydrogen or hydrogen that is produced from the renewable energy, but we would like to be technology neutral. So for us, it's very important to support different ways of hydrogen production, low emission hydrogen production, because the hydrogen molecules do not have colors. And we should discuss the level of emission of different way of production the hydrogen. Because as for today, it is the fact that the electrolyte hydrogen is the most expensive. So different reports indicate different prices, but according to our estimation, we think that it's the price around for Poland more than 12 euro for 1 kilogram of hydrogen. So this hydrogen from renewable sources is not very competitive. And of course, if we produce the fertilizers from the hydrogen, for example, the prices of the food could rise up. So it's not very acceptable from the society.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Simon. Some of the really kind of key takeaways, technology neutral, not really recognizing the colors, but really being focused on the volumes and really retaining the industrial competitiveness and economic, how it can be used as an economic accelerator. So I think when we get back to the second round of questions, it would be interesting to see how these ideas can be, which are already reinforced in the current strategy, can be actually even more strengthened in the next iteration. Wojciech, maybe going next to the Orlen. Obviously, Orlen is one of the major industrial players, not only in Poland, but also regionally in the Central and Eastern Europe as well. And it has its own quite ambitious decarbonization strategy, but also Orlen has its own hydrogen strategy until 2030, which is also quite ambitious in this regard. Could you please talk a little bit about, from the Orlen's perspective, why do you see, why are you prioritizing clean hydrogen? And in which sectors do you actually see the biggest need for hydrogen deployment with the current plans and the infrastructure?
Yes, hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation for this panel. So going into the question, so currently as Orlen, we produce over 3,100 tons of the hydrogen annually only in Poland, in our refineries and ammonia plants. And in seeking the best ways to decarbonize our assets and our operations, we see hydrogen as a potential tool for achieving this goal. And therefore, we see various applications for the clean hydrogen in three areas, mainly the refineries and fertilizers industries, so big consumers. Second is a synthetic fuels production, mainly e-jet. And the third one, road transport as a pure fuel for the, let's say, big vehicles like city buses, heavy-duty vehicles, rail transport. So this is the areas that we see the potential for the clean hydrogen. And actually, those areas are reflected in our strategy for the hydrogen by 2030, which includes goals, for example, for the hydrogen production and utilization for the synthetic fuels production or as a transport fuel. And currently, as a Orlen, we are already developing the hydrogen sector. So this year we are launching the first hydrogen production hub or first hydrogen production hydrogen refueling stations in Poznań and in Katowice. In the next years, it will be a more intensive investment period for us. Every year we are going to have another hydrogen refueling stations or another hydrogen production hubs to be launched. But from our perspective, the use of the clean hydrogen can be somehow easier to implement, especially in refineries or ammonia plants, where we can just, utilize existing production assets and change just the way how the hydrogen is produced and further utilized to produce fertilizers or classic fuels. Considering the market conditions, we believe that in the short and in the medium term, the greatest demand for the clean hydrogen will be generated by the industry, where the hydrogen is currently used, so refineries, chemical plants, something like this. But I think we should also mention that according to the RED III directive, hydrogen is no longer just one of the tools to decarbonize, but this is just a required way for decarbonization with the specific targets by 2030. So this is called RFNBO. And we've got two targets, one target 1% in the fuels in the transport sector, 42% target as a feedstock in the industry. Of course, there are some dedicated targets for the RFNBO usage in the aviation or maritime transport as well. So as a result, today, for every fuel or fertilizer producer, coming into clean hydrogen production and utilization is adapting to the EU requirements somehow. So this is our point.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And very happy to hear about this very clear prioritization from your side, and also some of the projects in terms of refueling stations in Poznan, but also the ones that are going to be upcoming this and next year. And I know also that Gregors from Institute of Power Engineering has some really interesting analysis or RFNBO, so would be cool to get to that in a short while. Janetta, can you hear us so that you can go next?
Yes. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you very much for being with us, Janetta. So I think that now we have heard a little bit from the government, from the industrial player. So it would be really interesting to hear the perspective from the project developer. The cluster of hydrogen technology is obviously in charge of quite a bit of project in the pipeline, some of them funded from the European Union. So it would be interesting to maybe reflect on your experience, but also on the project developers that you're engaging with. What are some of the needs from the project developers, from the policymakers especially, and from the policies to ensure successful implementation of those projects in the pipeline?
Thank you for this question. It's a very complex one. So to ensure the successful implementation of hydrogen projects in Poland, project developers need several key supports from policymakers. First, it's clear regulatory framework. They need a stable and well-defined regulatory environment, and it's crucial. This includes specific regulation for hydrogen production, distribution, storage, and usage. And these clear guidelines will help attract investment and reduce uncertainty for developers. The next step is and it's very significant for investment is required to build the necessary infrastructure, including electrolyzers, refueling station, and transportation networks. This infrastructure is essential for integrating hydrogen into various sectors such as transportation and industry. I think one of the most important things is financial support. So they need a financial mechanism such as grant subsidies and tax in investment in hydrogen technologies. The support from the European Union, like funding for Allren's project, is a good example how financial backing can propel large-scale projects. We need more research and development projects, and this point is very important and it's essential to advance hydrogen technologies. This includes developing efficient of electrolyzers, fuel cells, and hydrogen storage solution, and collaboration with academic institutions. So the sector coupling and integration is very important, and policies should promote the integration of hydrogen into various sectors, as like I said, for example, transport, energy, or industry. This includes using hydrogen to decarbonize hard to electrify sector like a heavy industry and long-haul transportation. Then the next thing is conducting true analysis of hydrogen potential and demand can help in strategic planning. Identifying optimal localization for hydrogen production hubs or hydrogen valleys and planning the necessary infrastructure can streamline investments and reduce costs. It's very important for developers. And obviously, education and workforce development. We need a skilled workforce to design, build, and maintain hydrogen infrastructure. Is vital. Policymakers should support educational programs and training to prepare workers for the hydrogen projects and hydrogen economy. I think by addressing these needs, policymakers can create an environment conducive to the growth and success of hydrogen projects in Poland. So that's from my side.
Wonderful list. Absolutely wonderful list. Thank you, Janetta, so much. And I think there is just so much to really unpack in terms of the clarity of the regulatory framework, clear guidelines to boost the investor confidence, necessary infrastructure, sector coupling, some of the analysis that you have mentioned. I would be very curious then to hear out, especially from Instrat, because they have done some of the really great analysis on that. So I would be curious to hear from their end. Hydrogen valleys you have mentioned as one of the key components of both the hydrogen strategy, but also Orlen's strategy. So I think Wojciech will be speaking a little bit about the hydrogen valleys as the ecosystem enabler in this regard. Well, thank you, Janetta, very much. Gregors, maybe we can move now to the Institute of Power Engineering a little bit. Could you share, like, with all the hypes and the rosy glasses that people tend to look at hydrogen, what are a little bit of more pragmatic, grounded challenges and some of the perceived threats that you see when it comes to hydrogen economy development, if the one is even feasible, but also if you could maybe offer us a little bit of optimistic opportunities as well that you see from your perspective.
So, good morning, and thank you for the invitation. So, so we all have to be optimistic, because the hydrogen is the cleanest source of energy which we can imagine. Of course, now we produce it from the other sources, but we want to switch this modes of production. But I think that we should be optimistic, but we should also concentrate on some things which have to be put in order to not only be optimistic, but also to see fruits of our acting. And I think that there are some we can say some gaps on different level on which we act, which we should cover, which we should bridge. The first one, which probably was also mentioned today, is a financial gap. Yes, because unfortunately, as Director Beliński said, in Poland, we estimate that the cost of production of the hydrogen is about 10-13 euros per kilogram. In Europe, we mean, of course, the renewable hydrogen, clean hydrogen or green hydrogen, as we sometimes call it. So the cost is quite high. In Europe, we see this cost is about 5-6 euro. So especially in countries which have good location to use the RES energy sources. So we have to close this gap, and we are working here in Poland on it, how to do it, to prepare different instruments. On the other hand, we have hydrogen which comes from hydrocarbons, and the cost of it is quite low. It is about 1, 2, or 3 euros. Also depends on location, on the scale of production, etc. So this gap is quite huge. Yes, so we have to find some kind of formula to cover it. Of course, we can say that to some extent this gap will be covered by EU ETS system. Yes, which is directed to penalize hydrogen which is coming for hydrocarbons. But I'm afraid that it is not enough. Yes, we have to work on other instruments, because nowadays it is difficult to force companies to invest in green hydrogen when you see so huge distance between fossil fuel based hydrogen and clean hydrogen. So I think that the public support is one of key elements of this problem. And we are aware of it, and I think that the Europe is also aware of it, and we have some instruments on the agenda. Of course, these public support schemes should be, in my opinion, should have a degressive character. Yes, so we can say that we are ready to pay for first movers some subsidies in order to spur the market production of the hydrogen, but it should have that degressive character, and it should shrink toward the end, because at the end of the we can say that the road of two curves. Yes, when you will see on the green and hydrogen which is coming from the hydrocarbons, this prices should meet in one place, and we hope that it will happen around 2030 2030, and we should also close the technological gap, yes, because there is still something to do in the case of large-scale projects, of course, also on the R&D side. Those projects should be conducted along the whole value chain. I mean, on the renewable energy sources, production of the hydrogen, distribution, and end use. We should spur hydrogen equipment production along the value chain. What we do, of course, in Europe, thanks to some regulation and incentives. And at the end, the high technical readiness level and of technologies, more hydrogen equipment should give us positive economies of scale and learning curves, which will result in lower prices and broader availability of hydrogen production and equipment. So we are optimistic, but we have to do many things on the road to make hydrogen the main instrument of the decarbonization. Yes, it is especially bigger problem for country which has energy mix based on coal, and many sectors in Poland will compete about renewable energy sources. Yes, because we have to use it for hydrogen, for electromobility, for decarbonizing industry, and many other sectors. So I see it as a main challenge, yes, to establish large-scale energy, renewable energy sources, which will be directed to different use. Thank you.
Thank you, Gregor, very much. And thank you very much for this cautious optimism for the hydrogen and outlining the financial and technology gaps. I think it would be also very interesting later on from Alex to provide a little bit of perspective how European and also the US perspective looks like that, and if there is any learnings, especially through transatlantic perspective, that could be helpful for that. Going next to Michal Smolan and Instrat Foundation. Instrat is famous for so much of amazing analysis that you produce, especially on the energy modeling side of things. So it would be really helpful, going back to Jeanette's point on the need for more analysis. If you could talk a little bit about, from the perspective of Instrat, but also wider civil society, how do you see clean hydrogen playing the role in the clean energy transition in Poland?
Thank you very much, Tamara. Yeah, so you can approach the question about the future of the hydrogen in Poland from multiple perspectives. You can, for example, see what is a consequence of EU regulations that we have. Another way would be, of course, to have some forecasts basing on existing pipeline of project. Our exercise is optimization exercise. In our report published last December, we used our model under the framework of Python for power system analysis to explore the optimal scenarios for decarbonization of Polish power system, but taking also into account electrification of heating, parts of transport, but also of hydrogen production. So we assumed that first 2 gigawatts of electrolyzers that are envisioned by Polish hydrogen strategy can happen in 2030. I don't think that we are necessarily on that path, but we had that assumption. But further investments in electrolyzers and, of course, the actual utilization of those electrolyzation, like how in which hours they actually work, was decided by the model. And unfortunately, when we take into account carbon pricing, but without any additional sectoral measures like contracts for difference, electrolyzers are seldom run in 2030, and in fact only closer to 2040 they really scale up and are widely used in the scenarios that are most ambitious about possible addition rate of clean electricity. So if we go very quickly with renewables, with also nuclear, then by 2035 it really starts to happening. If we go quickly, but not as much, then closer to 2040. So that was an optimization exercise. It's not a forecast or recommendation. We understand like many limitations, but it can suggest like a couple of things. So first of all, large-scale renewable hydrogen production is really the future. In our most ambitious scenario, in 2040, we have 20% of electricity demand from the electrolyzers. So that's a considerable scale. But even then, this is not enough to fully decarbonize hydrogen used in the industry and some sectors of transport. So we see how much electricity would we need to decarbonize hydrogen that way. And in general, in Poland, replacing gray hydrogen with the domestically produced green one, renewable one, is among the more expensive parts of the transition. And under current forecasts for gas prices, we will need substantial subsidies and regulatory support for many years to come. So to sum up, like what role should hydrogen play in Poland, and what we are looking at coming from the civil society, which like try to oversee also the strategies and programs. So I think our key should be to have a realistic plan for decarbonization of the key strategic industries that we really don't want to see fully relocated, because this is an alternative that can happen. We, for example, want to have some fertilizer production in Poland because this is very much an issue of food security. We need still some amount of domestic production because we need this resource also in Poland and in European Union because of geopolitical risks. So before like 2035, before 2040, when the renewable hydrogen can really work based on carbon prices because of like abundant electricity, what would happen before is reliant on subsidies. And if we pay for subsidies, we should have a clear vision, what are we paying for? So I think this is something that should really be more seen in upcoming programs. And yeah, after 2040, with abundant electricity, with also like very ambitious EU reduction goals, then we can also see some additional appliances for hydrogen. Then it can play also the role as the energy storage. But for now, industry and the parts of the industry that really want to protect against relocation, which is a sad risk that we have to consider.
Thank you, Michal. This is so interesting. I already thinking about, first of all, I really like your disclosure that the models are not predictive, so we should not treat them as such, but they are really the kind of the optimization studies to give a little bit of the alternative scenarios. But also it's very interesting going back to, for instance, what Orlen Wojciech was talking about, the prioritization of the sectors, and also seeing how the prioritization looks from instrument side. So I think a very interesting question maybe as a rapid fire in the end would be, where do we see actually the, because there could be the multitude of answers about where do we actually see those no regrets prioritized sectors for hydrogen deployment, which is very interesting. Alex, going next to you, because you have an exposure obviously to the Polish, but also the wider European policy landscape, could you please talk a little bit about, based on the existing landscape in the given circumstances, where do you see the most benefits or the opportunities for Poland to strengthen its current hydrogen efforts?
So much, Tamara. It's a pleasure to be here, especially among, as a non-Polish person. I am based in Central Eastern Europe, so I can see some of these struggles. But as you say, we've had a look into some of the details. So we've been working through some analysis on what exists, particularly in Poland. I think I want to start with just emphasizing that following the establishment of a new government in Poland, it's really in an advantageous position to update and develop core policy documents where clean hydrogen is relevant. So we've seen this in the National Hydrogen Strategy. We can see this in the updated draft of the National Energy and Climate Plan, as well as the PEP 2040. And what we've seen from reviewing these existing versions of these documents and where and how hydrogen features, we've developed several recommendations based on where we think clean hydrogen could be a bit more prioritized in how it is framed. I think one of the high level takeaways we find is that hydrogen is kind of used or mentioned everywhere. So it's across a lot of sectors. And if we look to the National Hydrogen Strategy, you know, this is only until 2030, and we're already seeing it across power, across industry, across transport. But 2030 is only 5.5 years away now. So that's quite a lot, quite high ambition to reach in quite a short space of time, particularly as the clean hydrogen market is only just developing. So, you know, I think it's already been mentioned in the panel already, so I'm going to have to re-emphasize what others have already said. But really, the first and biggest recommendation that Clean Air Task Force makes for Poland is really take a level of prioritization around what sectors need clean hydrogen deployment for their decarbonisation. You know, clean hydrogen is an energy, well, hydrogen in general, liberating is an energy-intensive process. And so we must be mindful of this, that it's expensive, it uses a lot of energy. And at the moment, we don't have a lot of it as clean resources. You said at the beginning, predominantly, you know, millions of tons available today, but it's coming from carbon-intensive sources. So we should not distribute or deploy to sectors indiscriminately. And really, we need to rank around you know, how many decarbonisation options does each sector have available to it? Where clean hydrogen seems to be the best or maybe only techno-economic option available to it, as well as a level of time sensitivity. So who needs that clean hydrogen today to start their decarbonisation process, and who may need it in the future, and up to what volumes may we need that in? So we must, as I mentioned, keep in mind that today up until the medium term, it will remain a scarce and expensive resource. So let's deploy it strategically and develop it in the sectors that need it the most. So when we talk about priority sectors, we're thinking through those carbon-intensive hydrogen uses today, predominantly heavy industry like refining and petrochemicals, as well as fertilizer production. And Poland is, as mentioned, the third largest user in the EU today of hydrogen. So we obviously have an offtake, we have a need, we have a demand that exists there already today. So let's take advantage of it and start to be able to bring down some of the emissions from these sectors that are really struggling or have limited pathways available for them to decarbonize. It may be a portfolio-based approach where clean hydrogen will feature as one piece of that portfolio puzzle, but at least we can get it moving today and start bringing down emissions already without them continuing to pollute at high levels into the near future. So following this, the deployment should also be considered in segments of transportation where there's limited or no other options available for decarbonisation. We're talking aviation, shipping, and possibly long-haul heavy-duty trucking as well. These necessary technologies, their infrastructure, as well as the hydrogen-based fuels, are still in development at the moment. So we may not need it right now today, but it will very likely be needed in the near future. So we should plan that and build that in accordingly as we watch how the market is developing and scaling. Prioritizing and subsidizing hydrogen deployment in sectors that are less of a priority, often because it's economic or less energy efficient, risks distorting the clean hydrogen market, even if it's temporarily. And this will increase the risk of producers being unable to sell their produced volumes, or they'll be selling them at a price that's not economic in the long term when, for example, subsidies are reduced or no longer available. So this includes example of, for example, using hydrogen for producing electricity, blending it into our gas grids, or deploying it in light-duty vehicles like passenger car vehicles, buses, or trains. In the future, when clean hydrogen is more abundantly available and cheaper, these could then be an option. But we must also see how the market develops. You know, a number of these will see electricity as their main decarbonisation pathways, and we must then consider that in the mix when we're planning our national hydrogen strategy. So what is the decarbonisation of our energy system as a whole, and where does clean hydrogen fit? I'm not going to go through all of our recommendations. I'll mention a couple of others quickly because they've also been mentioned already on the panel. So I just want to emphasize them a little bit more. So we encourage the implementation of a technology open approach based on hydrogen's full life cycle emissions. So this should capture both the emissions from production as well as transportation emissions. We must move away from a production approach based on arbitrary colors or simplified descriptors on clean hydrogen production, and create a level playing field for all production both locally as well as imports, based on emissions reduction merits. No production pathway is emissions free, particularly in the near term. And as the market remains scarce in supply, energy intensive to produce and expensive to purchase, we must create the conditions that it becomes cheaper, more abundantly available to those sectors that need it the most. A renewables only approach faces intermittency challenges and high costs. I think we've seen in the recent hydrogen bank auction that the cost difference between producing renewables-based hydrogen in Poland compared to, say, Spain or Portugal, there is a huge difference there. So we must keep that in mind, that renewables-based in the near to medium term is going to remain expensive. So how can we help build a more abundant clean hydrogen market, help lower the price, build it at a faster pace without jeopardizing national and EU emissions targets? And as part of this, encompassing this whole point is we need strong international standards and a certification scheme to verify actual emissions and to develop this level playing field. Without it, it will be meaningless. And my third last point on this is really making sure Poland estimates its hydrogen demand clearly and carefully and implements infrastructure accordingly around this. Using a sectoral and time-bound approach, Poland should be able to forecast carefully where hydrogen demand will be. It's tricky. Lots of dynamics change. As mentioned, models can only do so much, but we can try our best and update accordingly on a regular basis. And whatever cannot be met domestically will be needed via imports, either from other member states or from countries from outside the EU. So building hydrogen infrastructure is a huge venture. It's high expense with long lead times to develop. So we must get it right. We must start it today. So we must plan carefully, limit imports to an as-needs basis, think through which import strategies make the most sense from a techno-economic perspective. And for example, from our recent analysis in a paper we did about hydrogen transport, that's thinking through short distance pipeline transportation. That could be through collaboration with EU countries. If we're thinking where countries have high abundance of wind energy, solar energy, and are able to produce lower cost hydrogen in a bigger volume, how do we get that to Poland, who needs it as one of the priority countries? And we also need to think through other import methods that make sense. So, for example, importing ammonia. As mentioned, Poland produces a lot of fertilizer. It needs a lot of ammonia, and to begin cleaning that up, can leverage importing clean ammonia to be used in its fertilizer production and other chemicals as well. So really my three high takeaways is sectoral prioritization, producing based on full life cycle emissions, and estimating hydrogen demand and planning infrastructure very carefully.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for rounding up, really shifting our thinking from colors to volumes, thinking about transportation very carefully and having realistic expectations, but really also thinking where hydrogen is needed most right now and making the prioritization based on that. Wonderful. So I would like to encourage everyone who's joining us today, once again, to put your questions in Q&A section. We will get back to that. In a short while, I see already one coming through. Yaroslav, we will get back to that into the Q&A section. Thank you very much. So let's go right into the next cycle of the questions. We heard a lot of interesting insights, what is actually needed, what are some of the challenges for the industry, project developers, civil society, international perspective. So I think it would be really helpful, Simon, going back to you, if you could share your reflection. When the hydrogen strategy was first adopted in Poland, it was obviously a very different geopolitical situation. Since then, the war in Ukraine started, the geopolitical shifts, diversified energy supply. So it's a really different place that we live in right now, with a different geoeconomic realities. So it would be very helpful if you could share your insights since the first adoption of the hydrogen strategy. What are some of the challenges and also opportunities that you have come across throughout the implementation phase that could be helpful feedback loops, so to say, for this new update?
When it comes to the update, what we are preparing for the future in the hydrogen market, I think what is very important, because all this transformation, energy transformation speed up, we have a different solution how to create the low emission economy, because we can use of course hydrogen, but there's also some different technology that we can use. So that's why we start to prepare we start working on maybe not new, but some changes in our hydrogen strategy. But we also would like to include into this strategy maybe some solution connected with the carbon capture and storage of CO2, maybe some biomethane, because all this technology are on the market. There is some synergies between this technology. They can find this technology sometimes, for example, hydrogen is sometimes better for the chemical industry, but on the other hand, CCS could be used in some other parts of industry, and it could be better solution. So that's why for the regulators it's quite challenging to find the right pathway to support all these different solutions, because at the end of the day, what is the most challenging is how to support from public sources, from public money, development of this technology. And we should try to avoid the competitiveness between these different technology and try to support all the solution. Because if I think what is at stake, what is the very important, that we should try to avoid the industrialization of European Union. Because all these goals from the Fit 55 package are very ambitious, but on the other hand, because of the cost of this low emission technology, it is the risk of the industrialization of European economy, and we should try to support different technologies and try to support the competitiveness of our industry. So that's why, as for today, we try to connect these dots and to find some common approach to support all the technologies.
Thank you very much. So scaling up multiple technologies in a way that they don't cannibalize, but rather complement each other. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Wojciech, going back to the Orlen's plan, we mentioned a couple of times that Poland is obviously an industrial powerhouse of Central and Eastern Europe. Orlen's plans is not only nationally expansive, but also regionally applicable. And no country is an island, and more interconnected we are, better we will tap into each other's learnings and so on. So I would like to get your and Orlen's perspective. How do you see actually Poland as the part of this bigger hydrogen ecosystem? Some of the plans, existing activities that Orlen is engaging with, which amplifies cross-learning in the region, but also beyond, including some cross-border infrastructure deployment. We mentioned a little bit earlier Hydrogen Valley as one of the key components of the strategy. So if you could speak about where do you see Poland's role in the regional ecosystem?
Thank you. Very good question. So how we see that? So similarly to natural gas, there are some plans to build hydrogen pipelines from east to west, for example, Nordic Baltic hydrogen corridor from Finland to Germany. As well, there is some idea for the pipeline from Ukraine to the Germany with the hydrogen. There are also the plans for the construction of terminals for importing green ammonia to Polish seaports. So some projects for large-scale domestic hydrogen production in Poland are also underway, some of them financed under IPCEI. So as a result, on the one hand, Poland could become a transit country for major hydrogen transmission routes to the EU and benefit, of course, as one of the recipients of this gas. But please bear in mind that Poland could also provide the hydrogen storage functions for storing the hydrogen in salt caverns, for example, therefore stabilizing hydrogen supplies to Europe. And in Poland, we've got very good conditions to build sub-storages, what is very unique. Not so many countries in Europe have such possibilities. Then on the other hand, considering several potential hydrogen supply routes and supply routes for the hydrogen derivatives to Poland, we could become in the future a hydrogen hub, trading hydrogen with neighboring countries. And then the large scale of demand of hydrogen and consequently the liquidity of this market could result in a very competitive prices for the hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives, enabling us as a country to trade hydrogen effectively with our neighbors. Another interesting scenario for us could be entering in the market of more advanced hydrogen-derived products, for example, synthetic fuels like e-jet fuel or e-methanol. So currently we have a fairly large scale of CO2 production from cement plants, large industrial facilities or energy sector, with a certain portion which could be considered as biogenic CO2 due to the biomass combustion. Additionally, as a country, we have a significant potential for the production of biomethane and biogas in the future, which could generate biogenic CO2 when burned. So if we could combine this access to, let's say, well-priced green hydrogen with access to the CO2, primarily biogenic CO2, we could become in the future one of the leading producers of synthetic fuels for the maritime and aviation industries. And in our view, this scenario would be highly advantageous due to the limited competition and therefore potentially high margins. We could see that Denmark, for example, is currently pursuing exactly this strategy within the EU, leveraging the large volumes of the biogenic CO2 that they've got and the ability to produce renewable hydrogen thanks to the significant share of renewable energy in Denmark. So there are, let's say, a couple of strategies, what to do, what we can be in the future in terms of the hydrogen valleys. Yeah, please bear in mind that Poland is quite a big country, and connecting domestic hydrogen valleys with the foreign ones through the infrastructural links would be possible in the future when the European hydrogen backbone will be completed, for example. So as a result, today, international cooperation in hydrogen sector focus on the knowledge exchange, and this is the same what other, let's say, valleys do internationally. We as Orlen today, we are engaged in several hydrogen valleys in Poland. For example, we've got the Amber Hydrogen Valley, when we've got the 30 partners from 8 EU countries, and including seaports like seaports from Latvia, Greece, Italy, Finland. So our collaboration with them is focused on the knowledge exchange, replicated hydrogen applications in the port logistics, something like this. So in summary, the Poland's future role in the regional hydrogen market could be quite important, from the hydrogen market hub in the region or hydrogen storage player for the EU, or even, important hydrogen derivatives producer. But this finally will be mainly depend on the direction of the hydrogen sector and pace of the development of this sector in EU. So this is how we see the future for Poland and also for Orlen.
Thank you very much, Wojciech. And I already see a very interesting question coming up on hydrogen valleys from our audience. So maybe we can back to that into our Q&A. Jeanette, going next to you, we have talked really a lot about how the EU laws basically are transposed in Poland, and how Poland should be able to maybe better tap into some of the funding available at the European Union level. And it really goes back to the question how we can better synchronize maybe some of the engagements of the national level activities in Poland with the EU activities to ensure a bit of more smooth and harmonized process with ongoing investment process, which is very often obviously led by the private sector. So it's still going about the harmonization of the processes and giving more confidence to the investors who are willing to invest in Poland. Why should they invest in Poland versus maybe other countries in Southern Europe, which have abundant renewables, right? So Jeanette, if you could come in and maybe talk a little bit about that.
Thank you very much, Tamara. So Poland can take several strategic steps at the supranational level. So for first, should more actively participate in European hydrogen initiatives, such as European hydrogen strategy, by engaging in these frameworks. Poland can align its national policies with EU goals and benefits from shared knowledge and resources. Collaborating on cross-border hydrogen projects with neighboring EU countries can enhance infrastructure development and integration. The next is implementing EU-wide standards for hydrogen production, distribution, and usage ensures compatibility and reliability. Poland should adopt the EU certification framework for clean hydrogen to guarantee that its hydrogen meets the EU low carbon criteria, facilitating trade and integration. We can maximize the use of and we should maximize the use of EU financial instruments such as Horizon Europe and other funding hydrogen instruments. Engaging with these funds, I think we will help bridge the investment gap and accelerate the project development. We should strengthen Poland's participation in EU research and innovation networks by more collaborating with other member states on R&D initiative, and Poland can enhance its technological capabilities and stay at the forefront of the hydrogen technology. Ensuring that national hydrogen strategies are aligned with the broader EU climate goals, such as this Green Deal or Fit for 55 package, will create a coherent approach. Poland should integrate EU climate objectives into its national policies and the regional one to contribute effectively to the collective EU targets. The next step is enhance at the EU level by establishing a dedicated national committee to liaise with EU bodies, which will help streamline the integration of the EU law and hydrogen policy goals into Polish legislations. I think Polish policymakers should update goals regarding hydrogen economy in its energy policy and the National Energy and Climate Plan, updating these strategies based on the objective of repower and referencing the hydrogen strategies of neighboring countries, especially like Germany. Certainly, the process of implementing of hydrogen directive as soon as possible. We have only 2 years, and not delaying another few years like we do it before with other directives. I think inclusion of cross-border hydrogen projects in updated national hydrogen strategy, which will further strengthen regional collaboration and infrastructure development. And I think it's very important to establishing platforms for policy harmonization and knowledge exchange with other EU countries can help Poland align its national strategies with EU directives. And very important is making a platform to regular dialogue and workshops with EU institutions and member states can facilitate the sharing of best practice and policy frameworks for Poland. So I think by taking these steps, Poland can synchronize its hydrogen initiative with EU policies, ensuring a harmonizing and efficient investments process. and that leverages both national and supranational strengths.
Thank you, Janetta. A very helpful checklist that can serve as the guide as well for the EU-level harmonization policies. Gregor, going back to you, one of the things that you have mentioned in your first intervention was really talking about the financial and the technical gaps. So I think that going back to kind of a bit of a gap question, but also the project developers that Janetta is representing, how do you think the industry and project developers actually bridge some of those gaps, be it technology, financial, or other kind of gaps between existing fossil-based hydrogen production and consumption to the clean hydrogen alternatives?
Thank you. Thank you for this question. And also let me be in line with that what Wojciech said about potential hydrogen hub in Poland. Maybe I will say something which is not so popular, but in my opinion, the road to the hydrogen hubs goes through natural gas and LNG hub, yes, because we built a lot of infrastructure in natural gas, and we will continue to do it. And we should be aware to plan it and smoothly transform it into the hydrogen, into the ammonia, and synthetic fuels. I think this is the best way to avoid the problem of stranded assets. Yes, to plan the LNG infrastructure. The problem in Poland is that the cycle of the natural gas use is quite different than in the Western Europe. Yes, so we are on the wave when we build this infrastructure. So we have to do it because we skip the coal. And doing this, we should have in mind that we should easily adopt this infrastructure to the hydrogen and derivatives. And I also think that the very important technology which will play a role not only in Poland is CCS, because on the one hand, it will play the role of some kind of hedging instrument against high ETS prices. And on the other hand, it will help us to develop projects related to the synthetic and sustainable fuel production. So when we talk about gaps, we should put them in some order and to find instruments to cover them. And one of it was also mentioned today, is some kind of institutional or regulatory gap. Yes, because nowadays we discuss about thousands of pages of regulation in the EU, which should be adopted to the local law. And we have to do it in a very smart way at the government, local governments level, as well as companies. But we have to have clear vision, yes, how to do it. And the starting point for me is to have the vision of the energy mix, yes, which we want to have in 2030, in 2040. Of course, we aim to decrease the hydrocarbons in this mix, but it depends a lot on that. What will be the role of solar panel, wind energy, nuclear energy, because this gives us some framework to say what can be potential role of natural gas, which of course should decrease, but also what will be the potential role of the hydrogen. So we have to collect these things and prepare some proposition of the mix and adjust our policy to it. Of course, using some kind of scenario analysis as well. Yes, because we know from our lives and from the history that we prepared a lot of strategies and a lot of plans. Most of them we miss them, but they let us to think in a way which help us to adopt to current situation.
Thank you very much. So future-proofing our plans by exposing them to various scenarios and the geopolitical realities and making kind of a register, if it makes sense, the risk register of the various gaps and identifying the kind of matchmaking solutions is something.
Yes, there is also one gap. There is a social gap, yes, when it comes about the hydrogen, because it relates to the safety. Yes, because sometimes people raise the issue of the dangers related to the hydrogen. Yes, it should be also be addressed. And the other social dimension of the acceptance of the hydrogen, especially at the beginning, is that people should be aware that, especially at the beginning of the new technology, it will be much more expensive than the current mix. Yes, so we have to also prepare people on that. Probably we could also find the other gaps, yes, which has to be addressed to put some proposals on the table and discuss how to bridge them, yes, to 2030, 2040, yes. This is, I think that this is the problems which we discussed, but it is just the other way to look at it, yes.
Yeah, public engagement, over promising on affordable energy everywhere, every time sounds fancy and attractive, but not really realistic in many cases. Back to you, Michal, and straight to the point. Where do you think and what is needed from the policy perspective in this very moment with the geopolitical situations, economic perspectives that have been described, some of the risks that Poland is exposed to actually get clean hydrogen right?
Yes, Tamara, like a couple of years ago when we were having European hydrogen strategy and then national ones, too often the goal seemed to be to just develop hydrogen economy as an end of itself. And going forward, I think we should better ask like what do we want really to achieve? So first, like the first area is just lowering emission, and we have seen that unfortunately producing renewable hydrogen is probably not that efficient way to lower emissions in Poland now. It will be in the future, but not yet. But I think this area should be mostly driven by emission prices. Like we have this clear, efficient mechanism in the European Union. We are trying now to expand it to cover new areas. I think emission prices should be like a main economic incentives to actually avoid emissions. And this also is a potential for the development of the carbon capture, hydrogen or biogenic hydrogen. Like those are technologies that don't have the same like scalability as the renewable hydrogen, but in the meantime, they can be efficient way to lower emissions from that sector. The second like area is learning and development. Of course, we cannot like ignore hydrogen for the next 10 years and then try to have this expanded hydrogen economy in one day. Yeah, we have to invest early, we have to support regulations, we have to support markets to develop. And my issue is like, are we really are the things that we are investing in are really necessary on this way forward? And this is my concern, for example, around support for hydrogen buses. They are commonly supported also like under the like idea to develop those local hydrogen systems, or for example as part of hydrogen valleys. But I would prefer to have a clear like vision where we are going in the long term, like at what point that will become like competitive against alternatives. We don't want to pay for that learning and development forever. Yeah, this should be temporary phase, so we should think about the end goal. And to some degree in countries like Poland, this is also a question about scaling up production of renewable hydrogen already in this decade. Because if we want to meet RED III goals for the share of renewable hydrogen in the industry for 2030, we should be very quickly scaling up the production, especially if we want to meet that with domestic production. And at that point, it is a question like, do we have the electricity to power it? And is it like really necessary to have the market, the regulation in place in like around 2035, 2040, when that really becomes effective? That's like a very, very challenging and touchy issue. But I think, especially in Poland, those goals are extremely ambitious. And we have seen, for example, in European Hydrogen Bank auction, how expensive it would be to produce renewable hydrogen in Poland. Germany is willing to use the European Hydrogen Bank framework to also subsidize domestic production, paying much larger premiums than that you would pay for production in Iberian Peninsula or in Scandinavia. But in Germany, in Poland, the subsidies would be substantial. So if we want to do that, like, we have to prepare to pay for that. And I don't know if this is the right moment to go as quickly with scalability. Perhaps research and development regulations would be a better way for a couple more years. Of course, this is also a result of the gap in the development of renewable power. If we developed onshore wind quickly, offshore before, if we had like nuclear from the previous era, we would be in better situation. But we are in situation in which we don't have this amount of abundant renewable, and solar is just not enough to power renewables. And the third area is the strategic and economic goals. So of course, if we would like to optimize the global industrial production, we would see a massive relocation of the industries. Yeah, the fertilizer would be probably produced in North Africa and things like that, and there are like environmental reasons to do so. But of course, we also have our geopolitical concerns about our economy, about stability, about also lowering dependence on the imports. And that is also to the final products, but also to hydrogen imports. Yeah, of course, hydrogen imports are also the subject to the same level of consideration. So on this area, I think Poland and EU, but especially Poland, because that's like at the end of the day, like our job, we need to have like a clear geopolitically based industrial strategy to like really have a decision what we want to have in Poland and what we are willing to subsidize, to pay heavily price, to a degree sometimes lower our economic competitiveness, but to have them domestically. This is not like the first area, of course. We, for example, do that with agricultural production in the European Union. Yeah, we protect them against competition. So we really have to ask, like, what are the amount of imports and what are the amounts of risks that we are willing to be exposed to? Because the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. So this third area is not a question of the hydrogen itself, but instead of the industrial strategy and hydrogen as one of the important areas inside of that.
Thank you, Michal. It's a very, very insightful, geopolitically conscious industrial strategy, and what hydrogen can play as a tool in this huge toolbox of decarbonization. What risks are we willing to take and be exposed to? Thank you very much for that. And Alex, with some of your thoughts, I think Michal and also others, Michal mentioned Germany as an example, which also has to subsidize quite a bit. Then, for instance, some of the examples of the Iberian Peninsula and the Nordics. So I think as a final touch, it would be very helpful if you could share what Poland can actually learn from the international fora. And in that, we mean in the European fora, UK, but also the transatlantic learnings that could potentially fit into the strategic update.
Thanks, Tamara. And I think it's useful to start off by saying that Europe is in a unique position. There are other regions that also face this. I'm thinking parts of Asia, thinking Japan, for example, where we're energy deficient domestically now. So, you know, we built our society off of abundant, dirty energy like coal. We have transition to gas, but in limited supply. So we face a world where we're trying to build a renewable energy, but we will be limited on capacity for that. So imports always have to be considered, and that's not always applicable in the global piece. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the US perspective, because the Clean Air Task Force operates in the US. It's where we started, and we've been doing quite a lot on US legislation around zero carbon fuels and hydrogen development. And I think there are some lessons learned there, but we just have to remember that there are some large differences that we must take into consideration when we compare the two contexts. So when we look to the US, they've kind of tried to develop, I guess, a more simplified process for establishing a clean hydrogen economy in their country. So when we look at what the US has been implementing, one of the first is their V45 tax credit. This is obviously with subsidy levels up to $3 per ton of hydrogen produced, determined based on clear emissions thresholds that do not discriminate against any particular production pathway. So that's something I think we really need to consider if we're subsidizing using taxpayer funding, is how to keep it a simplified and streamlined process based on those emissions reductions. They also have the Hydrogen Hubs program. So they have selected 7 projects for development based on a set criteria. And with the limited resources and trying to limit competition, they have tried to fairly and evenly distribute support across those seven projects. Within that criteria, they're supporting a minimum number of clean hydrogen production pathways to ensure a diverse market. This includes methane reforming with installed carbon capture and electrolytic hydrogen with renewables and nuclear energy sources. The hubs are also being encouraged to develop consortia with local stakeholders, including off-takers, priority off-takers, and local communities. The selected hubs are also geographically diverse, and almost all of them, 6 of the 7, are cross-state collaborations of either 2 states or more, covering quite large geographical areas as well. The US also has a number of supporting stimulation packages around different parts of the hydrogen value chain, including developing their domestic electrolysis and other hydrogen manufacturing capabilities, hydrogen refueling and clean corridor infrastructure development, as well as clean port developments as well. So I go back and I emphasize that both our circumstances are very different from an energy availability perspective, energy security perspective, but also from a policy and funding perspective. We don't necessarily have these large volumes available to commit to projects like the US has. We have quite a fragmented, diverse set of policies, regulations, incentives, and funding instruments in Europe that we have to manage and work together and try and synergize at the EU level, as well as how that's then implemented in member states' countries. But as I say, I think there are some conditions and some decisions that Poland and Europe as a whole can take or can consider in line with how things are developing in the US. So my first is, as I mentioned, incentivizing low carbon hydrogen production pathways available. For example, if nuclear was available in Poland, we could be cleaning up our grid and deploying our renewables for clean hydrogen, or vice versa. We could have a reactor dedicated to hydrogen production that could ensure that renewables are plugged into the grid. So, it gives you options to play once you've got more abundant, firm, clean power available to produce both hydrogen and clean electricity. We can identify very clearly priority projects that need clean hydrogen first, and bring in our limited available support to get these projects to a final investment decision and bring them into operation. We should stimulate cross-border collaboration. Hydrogen hubs are a great way, or good hydrogen valleys in Europe. Hydrogen hubs are a really great mechanism to be able to do this. I would place my biggest emphasis here because Poland is the 3rd largest consumer and producer of hydrogen today. It has assets that it can use and utilize. It could be a key player in the Central Eastern Europe region for both producing and distributing clean hydrogen, as well as getting clean hydrogen from nearby countries, regions, states into the industries that need it. So we must work collaboratively with member states to ensure that available supply gets to those industry clusters that need it. We must really think about this carefully, because we must try not to stimulate deindustrialization, as Simon already mentioned, because that will have huge socioeconomic consequences on Europe. We need the support at the EU level to get efforts on the ground, particularly where national support and financing may be constrained or may take time to build and develop. We've talked about the hydrogen bank a little bit. Does Poland really have that available financing to bridge that large gap between production? And so, the EU really needs to work with Poland, see it as a priority country, see where those priority projects are, and try and encourage the investment or the kind of subsidization that's coming out of the hydrogen bank into priority countries like Poland. We must not incentivize off-taker use that could lead to stranded assets and risk project failure. This is particularly when we're leveraging taxpayer funds, because we see pushback on things like the Green Deal when we think that financial decisions are being made in the wrong place or outcomes are not being achieved. So we really need to keep this in mind from a political perspective. And further to this, we need local stakeholder and citizen buy-in. This is a key part of the US hydrogen hubs. They have community benefits plan, and I think we should really make sure we consider this in Europe as well. Education and outlining what the socioeconomic and environmental benefits clean hydrogen will bring in both its production and its use to local communities. And we can actually look at an example of this in the UK. I think this has been a really interesting example of maybe what not to do or to learn from mistakes or kind of decisions that they've made. So the UK has been pushing for pilot projects of blending or using pure hydrogen in residential settings. So for example, in heating. And despite over 50 academic studies demonstrating that it's expensive, technically challenging, doesn't bring down emissions as much as you may hope, and also has a hazardous nature or component to it, they're still trying to proceed with this process. But in recent months, there have been 3 pilot projects shelved, and a lot of this has come down to opposition at the community level. So we really need to plan carefully with all citizens involved, all stakeholders involved, center efforts around projects that are the most worthwhile and will be the best value for money for taxpayers.
Alex, thank you very much for bridging the gap and really bringing this international experience that not everything will be transferable, but we also don't have to invent the wheel every time. And there could be some good examples, but also mistakes that we could learn from our decisions. Well, thank you very much to all of you for these very, very insightful insights. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A chat, and I would like to thank everybody who has posted, and maybe we could start answering some of them. So the first one is from Yaroslav, where he's asking basically, where do you see the role of regional and local public authorities in the net zero concept, in the different ways, the knowledge, awareness, education, promotion, and so on. So Michal, maybe because Instrat has been involved obviously in a lot of regional works through Just Transition, but also beyond as well, you could talk 1 or 2 minutes, because we are already the time limit on that.
Yeah, I think like Poland has a lot of hydrogen valleys, like almost like there was a time a couple of years ago that almost every month we heard about new initiative. And I think that the problem is that those initiatives quite commonly like were established only on like preliminary agreement level, with very little like practical outlook, what we would do, what would actually happen, and what is the long-term plan. And like most of the Poland now is a part of Hydrogen Valley. Like actually, I think most Polish people live in the region that is a part of such agreement. So I think what we need now, we like this optimism and this like approach from the local stakeholders is very much like to be appreciated, but we now need the part from the central government when we have the regulations and also regulated demand. Like we really have to have also this like understanding of national players that yes, they have to buy the low carbon hydrogen, and we also have the subsidies in place to just make something really happen, because without those like additional very costly measures, the local optimism will like not amount to practical projects.
Thank you, Michal, very much. Next question from Yaroslav, I think is again, and anybody can take the question, but I think Wojciech, and 1 minute really. Can you comment on Hydrogen Valley's concept in Poland? What are the pros and cons? How it should evolve?
Yes, thank you. So I can, let's say, confirm what was said previously. So currently we've got more than 10 hydrogen valleys in Poland. And typical hydrogen valley is like dedicated initiatives when we've got multiple actors from business sector, from academia, public sector. And such cooperation is beneficial from one side because we could solve the problems in comprehensive way. So not only focus on the business side, but also, on the public activities, for example, public acceptance, permitting, where public bodies are playing the main role, or looking for an R&I agenda for the local universities. So this is the main pros. However, there are some typical problems for the valley, like, for example, how to cooperate with so complicated projects where you've got so many entities, and most of the time these entities got different goals, so it is very difficult to find the common way. But from my perspective, the main problem is, let's say, a lack of business case or lack of dedicated funds for the valleys at the country level. So each valley should, compete or show the good business case, and based on this business case, there will be the decision if they receive the grant for making this project as a next step or not. So some kind of verification of the plans of those valleys using the, let's say, grant money at the country level would be good right now. This is my position.
Thank you very much. Another rapid fire question from Jan. How we can compete with very cheap and low emissions hydrogen imported from outside the EU? Who would like to take this on? Michal, please go ahead.
Yeah, like the most simple answer is that we cannot. Like, on the technical level, there are some places when it would be always much cheaper, but there are some caveats. One of that is that those investments in hybrid renewable and electrolyzer projects are very upfront heavy when it comes to cost. Like, you pay mostly as investments, and there are many places in the world when the weather is good, but the conditions because of political risks, the investors might not be that keen to actually invest that much money up front for very, very delayed enumeration. The cost of capital will play a role. So I think if we have very stable regulatory approach, we also actually let business build stuff, which is a problem in Europe, but one we should solve. And we also pay a little more for the strategic security that we want to have, that can have not that much of an impact in the final product. Then there is a space to have at least some amount of renewable production in Europe, and also I think in Poland.
Thank you, Michal. Alex, 1 minute.
Yes, and faster than that. I think I go back to my point on certification. Strong certification that includes emissions from both production and transportation. If we're transporting on ships from South America, for example, those emissions are massive, and that makes it not low emission hydrogen anymore. So yes, we may clean up that transportation in the future, but not today. So we really need to stimulate clean domestic hydrogen first, and let certification systems and schemes play into our carbon border adjustment mechanism, and recognizing that just because it's produced by renewable energy in a far off country does not make it emissions free or clean hydrogen.
Thank you. So we have to think about life cycle analysis. Thank you, Jen. And Gregor, 1 minute, please.
1 minute, just complementary to what Michal and Alex said. Probably we are not able to compete with the cheapest location of the hydrogen production. So when we are talking about the revision of the hydrogen strategy in Poland, we should also think about the import strategy. Yes, how to do it, in what amount, how big amount of hydrogen we have to buy abroad and bring it to Poland. And I come back to the first thing, we need a energy mix strategy. Yes, because then we will decide how much we are able to produce and how much we have to import from outside. Thank you.
Thank you. And I acknowledge that we are at the time, but I also want to acknowledge a question from Blanca, a very rapid fire question. If you have heard of any criticism of the Green Deal in Poland, but also beyond, and what are some of those that you might have heard of in this space?
So just simply, the way in which we implement the European Green Deal will affect our economies, our industries, our finance, our societies. Yes, so we have to do it very carefully. And I don't believe in one-size-fits-all policy. Yes, we have to do it in the very unique local context. Yes, so I think that there's much to do, and then we will address a lot of doubts related to the European Green Deal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you for joining today's absolutely fascinating and very engaging webinar, to all the panelists, to the audience who have turned out for your questions. We will be following up with the recorded webinar. We will also follow up with some materials. So please follow on social media and also check out our website for more information about our planned activities in Poland and also wider Central and Eastern Europe. Thank you and have an absolutely wonderful rest of the day.